Welcome to the Lovers Lounge, where we talk to experts and other guests about topics related to love, relationships, and sex. I am your host, Tina Love, and today my guest is Janna Denton-Howes. She is a professionally trained marriage counselor who is known as the Chief Libido Officer and the Husband Whisperer. Welcome, Janna.
Thank you, Tina. It's great to be here.
Awesome, so much. I'm just so excited to talk with you just about the topic. And I've taken a look at your testimonials of people that you have helped. I've been on your website, and so I'm really anxious to talk about this topic. Although I know, it probably sounds exciting for men to hear, helping their wives to want sex more. However, these issues that lead women to this point are pretty serious. And so I'd like to kind of ask you to talk about some of the reasons why a woman may be at this point in their life. And I'm not sure, but maybe you have a personal testimony that you can just kind of help us set the stage for this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got married pretty young. I was 17 years old, and I was not pregnant, and I wasn't in some weird cult. I always have to give that disclaimer. But I don't know if it was my age or just our culture, but I was super uneducated and miseducated about my body and about sex. And we fought about sex so much. It was the thing in our marriage. You know how most couples have a thing, whether it's the housework or in-laws or something. Sex was the topic of our fun disagreements. So that was not very much fun. We started to see a couple counselors, and I started to read books, and I just generally felt really broken. I felt really alone. I felt frustrated and guilty, but at the same time, I felt really resentful of my husband for putting all that expectation and pressure on me. So eventually, with all of the marriage work that we did, I became a marriage coach myself, and I started working with couples and really continuing my education. We really hadn't solved it. I really hadn't fixed my low libido, if you want to say it that way. But there came a point where I'd accumulated a lot of knowledge, and I just had to go over the edge with trusting my intuition on the methodology that I created for myself. And really, I invited my husband along for the ride. But then I figured it out, which was so exciting and enlightening. And then I created a program called Wanting It More Program, and now it's helped hundreds of other women.
Yeah.
So that's my backstory.
Right. So what was some of the comments that you would hear, I guess, in your work? You started to hear from other women that perhaps had feelings that kind of resonated with you. What were some of the commonalities of, what they were saying that was kind of landing them in that position where they didn't want sex?
Oh, yeah. So the broken and feeling like there's something wrong with them is huge. Feeling confused and frustrated that everyone else seems to have this fantastic sex drive and they don't. So there's something lacking.
Mm-hmm.
This huge amount of guilt that they experience. Maybe finding out that their husband's love language is physical touch and feeling like they aren't being the best partner that they can be. Just a lot of confusion about why don't I want it? Why doesn't it feel good? And then there's that resentment piece of, well, if you just do the dishes more, or if you would just take care of the kids more, or if you would just do this, then maybe I would want to have sex with you more. So not really feeling like our sexuality is for ourselves. It's more to provide a need for their husbands. And yeah, I think the biggest thing that comes out of my work is that women finally feel normal and they don't feel alone, and there's some hope because our world really talks about libido is something like it's very much outside of our control.
Mm-hmm.
And these women also feel that. Like, I never, I might kind of want it, in the afternoon. Like, maybe I'll see something, sexual or something and feel a little tingling. And then by the night time, it's gone. And I have no control over this thing that kind of passes through me. Or maybe there's outside things that they feel like takes away their sex drive, like exhaustion or not feeling attracted to their husbands or body issues as well.
Yes, yes, that's a lot of what I was hearing in the ladies that were on your website as they were talking. That was some of the things that I was starting to put together. So there's a lot of anxiety with this. I could just hear the
Massive amount.
yes, yes. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like all of a sudden, you're around your husband and you don't want to touch him because, oh my God, if I touch him, then that's going to make him think that I'm ready, and I'm not really ready. So I just felt for those women. Can you just talk about the level of anxiety that goes along with this?
It's so fascinating to me. I really thought I was alone in this, like really quite legitimately. And these women legitimately feel alone. Like this is, and part of that is this anxiety. Like my husband would even just advance toward me and my heart would start racing. Or I'd know, okay, we're going to have sex on Friday night, and I would be dreading Friday night. Like, how can I get out of it? How can I pick a fight with him? How can I run away or get sick or something? Like, how can I avoid this? And I think there's so many levels and layers to this anxiety, and one of them is this kind of deep, raw fear of abandonment.
Hmm.
And if I'm not the kind of wife that my husband wants or needs, then I will be either actually abandoned, physically abandoned, or emotionally abandoned. He will withdraw from me. He won't be a team with me. He won't support me. And there's so many reasons for this fear, and there's reasons why men, do what they do. And sometimes they do withdraw from their wives. And this happens. They feel very rejected. They don't feel important. They don't feel like a priority. It's not because they're jerks. They've got their own insecurities and fears going on. And then there's that thing that you touched on there where if I snuggle with my husband or if I kiss him or if I give any indication that I'm really enjoying his physical touch, there will be an expectation and a pressure to advance things. And what if I'm not ready for that? What if I don't want like that right now? What if I feel like you don't have the space and the time to get into that kind of experience? So there's so much feelings of guarding
Oh yeah.
and protecting.
Right, right. And that's exactly as I looked at the video and I heard what they were saying, I just thought, oh my God, that's a horrible way to exist or just to be, to just have that level of stress and everything that you do. It's kind of like you're guarded and you're like, oh my God, what's this going to mean? It's just like walking on eggshells, I felt. So I felt really
Yeah.
bad. Okay, so there could be somebody listening right now that, maybe they just hadn't quite figured out really what's going on with them. But now that they hear you and they hear you talk about some of the things that you experienced and some of the things that the ladies that you have helped have experienced. So, how do you get them around to wanting a program like yours? And we're going to talk about your program, but it might just be that somebody hasn't even gotten to the level that they even think that they need help or that they're not courageous enough to get help. So, how do you talk to them at this point?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some fears. I think the biggest one is what does this mean about me that I need to get help about this? And I've experienced this for other things, like I'm working with a health coach right now. Well, what does it mean about me that I can't get my act together and figure out how to just eat properly or exercise? Because I think that's the biggest one. And it just boils down to this feeling like we're supposed to just know all this stuff. And as you probably know, 'cause this is what you do, is that it's not true. Like we're just not taught what we need to know in order to have great relationships. and great sex life.
Right.
Actually, we're given the opposite of that. So we're given the media, which gives us a formula for sex that doesn't work for the majority of the population. And furthermore, it's for performance, not pleasure. And we're also coming from this kind of puritanical shame culture around sex. And so we haven't been educated properly in our schools because we're not allowed to talk about the clitoris, or pleasure.
Right.
And so we're or maybe we had a religious upbringing that, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, gave us feelings of shame. God doesn't want me to feel good, and this is a bad and dirty thing. Or maybe we had negative experiences, whether that was abuse. I mean, 1 in 3 women experience this, or also there's many forms of negative sexual experiences we can have. And, like little things at parties when you're in your high school or when you're little or something like that. So we just have so much to work through, and we should never be expected to figure this out on our own.
Right.
Those are one of the biggest ones, I think. And then there's some smaller ones that are, how do I talk to my husband about this? How do I even tell him that this is something I'm struggling with? Because that was shocking to me. I thought the most of the women I would be serving, I didn't know that there was going to be this subset of people who had never told their husbands before. So they're literally forcing themselves to have sex 2, 3 times a week, and him not knowing that they're full of anxiety, dreading the experiences, and actually not enjoying themselves.
So how do you encourage, I'm sure that we'll get into this even more as we explore your program, but how do you get women to actually open up to their husbands about this? Because I would think that there's a point where you kind of have to let everything fall and just kind of say it or talk about the fact that, I'm not really comfortable. How do you get them to that point where they want to admit that to their husbands or their mate?
Oh, yeah. Well, Tina, I'm learning about that right now, and I don't think I'm still in the process of learning. So some things I do is I create a PDF document, so it's kind of a cheat sheet so they can talk to their husbands in a way that he can hear. It's not about blame. It's more inspiring. Like, look at the kind of sex life that we could really develop together. I help them see the motivations for men around sexual activity in their marriages, which is to feel wanted and desired and important. And it's not just about getting an orgasm, which I think a lot of women feel very used. And so helping them see that their husband's intentions are actually really, really honorable, and they're ultimately what their husbands want is to feel genuinely wanted and desired, not have pity sex or guilt sex from their wives. But they just don't know how to go about it. So what they do is they mimic what they're seeing on TV, if they've been educated by porn, educated in air quotes, or if they have been taught by, older brothers or something like that. So they're mimicking it, but they also are miseducated and affected by the world. And so I really believe that women can be the spark of change in a marriage. And it's not a very popular belief, but I think if we can just embrace it and know that a team, everyone has different capacities on a team. That would make a healthy team. And if you're the spark, it doesn't mean you have to carry the whole burden, but you can bring that to your relationship. And yes, it takes courage, but are you really willing to continue to do this for, the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? This is really a sustainable way for you to have a relationship with your husband. And in I've never had a woman say, yes, I'm totally fine if this continues for 10 years. So it's really a combination of things.
Right. Something interesting you mentioned about the fact that a lot of our males are not, just like we are not, educated properly about sex and intimacy. You mentioned pornography as a way that, unfortunately, maybe some men and or women learn about sex. But it's not necessarily the best way, I would say, to learn, because some of what we see in pornography is not really what happens in the bedroom, so to speak. And you mentioned you have actually had, your husband had an issue with pornography and how that kind of contributed to some of this. Can you kind of share a little bit about that?
Oh man, we could talk for hours on this topic, but
Yeah.
so about 15 years into my marriage, I've been married for 19 years now. Um, I found out my husband had a pretty strong pornography addiction, which I had zero knowledge about. Zero. We had gone to therapists and counselors, and I had attended workshops and read books. I mean, it's not like this topic hadn't been broached, but nobody had actually asked him point blank. So he was very courageous to tell me one day when I asked him very directly after listening to a podcast of about 6 men and finding out that all of them had had issues with porn. And I was like, that's 100%. Let me go ask my husband. And lo and behold, this was an issue for him. And healing from pornography was such a gift, not only for my marriage, but for what I do with women.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the stats are like 73 to 93% of men watch pornography. And I think there is, look, what I say about porn is I don't have a stance on porn, but I do solve problems for people. And porn contributes to a problem. So what we saw in our relationship was dramatic. I mean, not only for my husband's health, he was sleeping better, he lost a bunch of weight, he got a promotion, he just felt like way more joy in his life without that addiction affecting his brain. But then also physical things like he can maintain an erection longer and he can experience subtle sensations now in the sexual experience without needing harder and faster and more and more. I feel way safer. He's able to control himself, so go slow when I ask him to, things like that. It's also linked with attachment. So I don't know if your listeners might be familiar with attachment theory for adults,
Mm-hmm.
but basically, we can feel there's kind of different levels of attachment, different types of attachment. We've got anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, secure attachment, which is basically I can be in a relationship with you and I can have you be an individual and me be an individual, and I can take responsibility for my own happiness and I can contribute to yours. But then, at the end of the day, I am responsible for my own. And I'm noticing I see so many women go through this, is that pornography addiction in particular, and I think it's because it's related to orgasm and oxytocin, which is bonding, really messes up attachment, usually in the anxious attachment. So you find husbands are really needy.
Mm-hmm.
They really have a hard time when their wives go out and have fun with their friends, for example. They have a really strong reaction to any hint of rejection. It's very scary for them.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see this as it's a very far-reaching issue.
Right. Okay. And I think I'm going to try and have someone on soon to talk about pornography more and how it can indeed affect a relationship or marriage. I was just listening to you talk about the changes in your husband after looking into this. And so I really want to dig deeper into those effects and why and all of that. So I thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Welcome.
you have a program then for husbands and for wives that helps address the libido issue for women, but at the same time, it helps the husbands as well working with their wife on this. Now, can you just tell a little bit about then your program for the women and then for the husbands, the wives and the husbands?
Sure. Yeah. Would you like to know the steps that I take women and men through, or would you like to know more of the logistical stuff?
Well, let's talk about the logistical first stuff first, and then we can talk about the steps after that.
Sure. So it's an online group coaching program for women. And the husband program I often give as a bonus when I'm running my live rounds. And I've really designed this intentionally to work primarily with women and seeing them as a spark of change in the relationship. And the reason I do this is also because it's really critical that the woman has a voice. She finds her voice. And a lot of the women I work with have lost it or never had it. And it's so very scary for them to speak up and talk about what they like and they don't like, and be even, even if it's kind of silly things or things that they're not seeing in movies, and or maybe doesn't fit the typical intense sexual experience, for example. So I have a series of videos that these women watch over the course of 8 weeks. And then we also do group coaching calls, and we have a private Facebook group as well. And then with the husband program, which is again a bonus, that is a program that my husband and I developed and we filmed and we created together to help the husbands support their wives who are going through this program.
Awesome. And so what are some of the outcomes then? So there you have the program. Obviously, there's an objective then to help the two come together. So can you kind of talk about the end result? What do you see couples walking away with after having gone through the program?
Well, it's a huge variety of outcomes. And I think that's just natural. You're going to have some people who are all in it, and I definitely see a correlation between the effort you put into it and the result you get back. So for those couples or for those women who are all in, I see them at the Facebook Lives, I see them on the group calls, they're asking me questions, they're putting things into practice. The results can be amazing. So not only are they now having consistent, frequent, enjoyable sexual experiences that help the women feel peaceful, they feel interested in doing it again. There's some fondness around the sexual experience, but they also feel so much more relaxed throughout the week. Usually the women are now initiating a lot more physical contact, and the husbands are just feeling pretty awesome. They're feeling really desired and wanted and admired and all of those things that men really, really need. And that then the other things that have been really interesting to watch is that it goes beyond the sexual experience. So I talk a lot about communication principles. I talk a lot about the male and female brain. So we now see couples going beyond that and into other areas of the marriages, such as budgeting or housework, and implementing those communication strategies there. And then women usually report just way more confidence and courage in other areas. So we have a lot of women who go on to, lose weight and really get their health in check, or go for that promotion, or feel like better parents, better moms. There's a real sense of empowerment. Like, now I have my voice, I'm going to now shout it from the rooftops. I have a lot of women then who want to support other women in their journey with their sex life. So they're talking to their friends. I've had therapists who have changed the way they work with their clients. I've had doctors who changed the way they work with their patients. Or now women are saying, I can talk to my kids more freely without shame about sex. I can talk to my daughters about consent. I can talk to my ladies at church about, I've had one person start a little church group around sexual stuff in marriage, which is so exciting. So it's pretty wonderful to be part of that.
It is. It sounds really, really phenomenal. So you talk about some of those outcomes. I'm just like blown away. Like, wow, you go in and you're uncomfortable with this, and there's a lot of anxiety to finally you're comfortable, you are initiating, you are just high in heaven, I guess. So let's dig a little deeper into some of those steps that the women have to go through to get to the point where they are comfortable and now initiating. That's like, wow. Like, how, just give me a little bit
Mhm.
on how you get women to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, really learning how to create clear boundaries is a really critical first step. So, I have women go through a 3-week break from sex. And even just having that conversation can sometimes be transformational in a relationship. And sometimes it just stirs up a bunch of stuff. And thankfully, I'm there to help them through it. It definitely stirred up a bunch of stuff in my marriage. So they learn to have a voice, and they learn to have a voice through a couple of different ways. One of them is by letting their husbands have their own experience, that it's safe for their husbands to have big emotions about this, to feel fear, to have maybe feelings of rejection. But it's safe for them because their husbands are very resourceful human beings, and they can definitely stand on their own 2 feet. This is the beauty of boundaries. Actually, Brene Brown, who's a shame and vulnerability researcher, talks about the most boundary people are often the most intimate. We talk a lot about boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so the 3-week break is not just a break from sex, but it's also a break from the husband's initiating physical contact. And the women report telling me that it's a huge relief.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
And around week 2 or week 3, they actually are excited. They want to go give their husbands a hug. They want to give them a shoulder rub. They want to hold hands. They want to snuggle at night.
Right. Well, I'm just sitting here
And
thinking.
then,
Oh, I was going to say, I'm just sitting here thinking about, like I said earlier, the anxiety that I could hear in many of the women's voices and what they were experiencing. So I can just imagine all of a sudden you're going to give them a permission basically to say none of this for whatever. And so, yes, I can see where, my gosh, it probably is a big relief for the women. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and they already start to see some of their desire like being cultivated. Like they actually start to feel some draw, some attraction to their husbands again. I'm not talking about physical attraction, but to actually be around them physically.
Mm-hmm.
And some women get a little bit worried. They're like, it's week 2, it's not there yet. I'm like, look, like how long have you been in this cycle? Most of the women who come to me have been married somewhere between 10 and 18 years. And so this has been a chronic issue for a very long time. So, I really encourage them to give themselves a little bit of a break.
Mm-hmm.
But then while they're on this 3-week break, I get them to do some other things. So one of them is developing the ability to prioritize their everyday pleasure. I really believe that us women are in a pleasure deficit. And this isn't so much self-care. Like self-care would be drinking your water, eating greens, going for a walk,
Mm-hmm.
all of these things, great things. But this is actually the capacity to extract pleasure from everyday experiences.
Okay.
So simply your 5 senses. I'm sitting here. I've got this beautiful turquoise desk in front of me. I love the color. And I can take 30 seconds and just delight in the pleasure of my sight sense, for example.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of work around extracting and prioritizing everyday pleasure. We don't even talk about how to do that in a sexual experience yet. Like this is the start. It's a muscle you must develop. Then we go on to practicing a really powerful female trait of intuition. Simply trusting what feels good and trusting what doesn't. I like to tell my participants, if it's a maybe, it's a no. So again, we focus on practicing that in everyday experience, like going for a walk and thinking, do I want to turn right or left? It's a really exciting, freeing way to rely on yourself. And for so many of these women, they have been shoving that very deep, deep, deep down because they want to be a good wife.
Right.
And in the end, it's really not being a good wife if you do that, because it's not a sustainable practice for a really happy marriage. So we do that, and then I help them translate it into a sexual experience. And then we talk about connecting with their bodies. And what does that look like to really have your body be an estranged friend? For a lot of women, it's that. There's maybe some unexplained pain that's frustrating and you feel very victimized by, or maybe you can't lose weight and so that makes you want to hate your body because now you don't have value in the world. Thank you, culture, for all of that lovely stuff. Or maybe you've experienced some abuse or shame around your body. So we work through that. And then I teach them about exploration dates. This is kind of a new structure for the sexual experience, which is scheduled, because most of us have responsive desire, which means that our arousal needs to be cultivated. It doesn't just happen.
Right.
It needs to be in a sexually relevant, safe environment for it to happen. So scheduling sex is just a great, great way to do that. And I teach women to lead the experience so that they can create safety. If you want to create, safety is the most important feeling when it comes to desire. And so, we teach husbands how to be the responder. And then we just kind of rinse and repeat that cycle all over again as much as the women need it.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you a question, because we're kind of talking a lot about the woman who's married, who has a decrease in their libido. Sorry, my voice is leaving. And I want to also talk about the fact, or maybe you can answer me, men also go through this. Have you ever had the program reversed, where there's a man who has lost their libido and they come to you for the program? I'm just curious.
Oh my gosh, you should see the comments on my Facebook ads. So if you're ever curious about, look at the comments on my Facebook ads, because it's basically all people saying, yeah, but what about the opposite?
Yeah.
So I just serve a very niche part of the population.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say, if I could find somebody else who would create a program for men with low libido, I would be thrilled, because I would have so many people to send them. So I just have decided to do it this way, where I really just support one dynamic within a marriage. So I have a book that I recommend, because I get this question asked all the time, and it's just as common as women with low libido. So that's kind of how I deal with that.
Yes, because, I can imagine, and probably like the people on your Facebook, it's probably even more difficult for a man to admit that perhaps he has a decrease in his libido. And even, my gosh, think of the anxieties for him, because society says, or people think, that men are the ones, they're always ready, right? And so I can just imagine the level of anxiety for a man who has to try and come to the grips of, okay, I'm not feeling this way. Is there something wrong with me? Or there must be something wrong with me because everybody else, So, boy, that's really got to be very difficult for a man.
Oh, and for the women as well, because I think there's so much shame. Why doesn't my husband want me? Is it because I'm unattractive? Is it because this or that? And oh yeah, absolutely. It's just as much as an issue. It's just not my specialty.
So do you have, Janna, women who are single? Maybe they're not married. Maybe they've been married before. Maybe they want to be married, but they realize that in their dating, they just really have no desire. So, have you ever had someone who's not married, who wants to be married, but realizes that this is an issue?
I haven't, and I think I'm just really very clear. I use the term married a lot. I use the term husband and wife. And so I sometimes have people, like maybe in a same-sex relationship, or I do have once in a while people contact me, and usually I say, you are welcome to come in, but I'm going to kind of annoy you with all my terms. Like, if you're married to a woman and I keep on saying husband, I'm going to really annoy you. So I let them kind of decide around that, but I haven't had anyone who is just dating join my program. I think usually they just think, well, maybe it's not for me.
Right. Right. Okay. So if there's somebody out there right now who they think it's just not going to work, it's not going to work for me. I know it. I'll just be wasting money. What can you say to them to help them to understand that you can actually help? And then where should they call, or what, can you give them the website address and how they can get in touch with you and all of that?
Yeah, for somebody who says this won't work, I hear this all the time. And if you look at the testimonials, you'll find that most of the people say, I really didn't think, I thought this was a scam. I didn't think it was going to work.
Right.
And that's why I leave that in the testimonials, because I'm like, see, there's so many people with doubts. And the biggest thing is that women deep down really think there is something wrong with me, like at a deep level, whether that's my hormones are just out of whack and they'll never be, so what I try to say is that there's actually nothing to fix because there's nothing wrong with you. What you simply need is the right environment in your marriage and the right thoughts in your head. That's it. Mm-hmm. So I'm not actually fixing you because I don't think you're low in anything. I actually hate the term low libido or low sex drive because it's really inaccurate. What I have found, the women who come in my program are actually incredibly sexual women. They're very sensual. They're very sensitive to touch. But what's not working is just simply the environment. So there's nothing wrong to fix. You just need to learn some things. So it's quite a simple process if you follow it.
Okay.
And if you want to get into my world, go ahead.
I was going to say, before you talk about how to get into your world, I'm thinking that maybe if there's a man listening and he kind of senses that there's something going on because he and his wife or he and his partner, they don't indulge. So what can you say to him? And maybe how can he talk to her about getting help, or that he's learned about something, or how, what can you say to him?
So the best way to approach your wife is with acceptance. That'll soften her up very nicely. Acceptance. And the way that sounds is not blame or criticism, more concern about her well-being and how she's doing, and that you don't want to change her in order to make your marriage better, but that it's more concern on your part, so some compassion. And then also the acceptance part is, you know what, I'm okay. This is very counterintuitive, but saying, you know what, I'm okay if we don't have sex for the rest of our lives. I just want to make sure that you're feeling comfortable and happy, and that you don't have this, mental gymnastics going on in your mind all the time. Can I get into it? What's wrong with me? How do I fix it? All of that stuff. And I have a lot of husbands who will say, well, if I say I'm fine, never having sex again, then she'll be like, okay, and dust off her hands and we'll move on. But actually the opposite happens. When somebody feels accepted and loved just as they are, then they feel encouraged to change and to grow. They feel like they have space to want it for themselves. And is that good?
I was going to say, yeah, that's interesting, because what you're saying is the opposite happens. Kind of like when you were talking earlier about the break and how the ladies actually start to kind of, be interested a little bit, even coming to you and starting the program, and they haven't had an interest in I don't know how long, and then all of a sudden they go on this break, and then after 2 or 3 weeks they're like, well, now I kind of want him to touch me, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now,
I think whenever we feel held on tight, that's what men do. That's their strategy, is to hold on tight to their wives, either physically by grabbing her boobs or slapping her butt or holding her or pouting if he doesn't get a hug, that sort of thing. So trying to grab onto her and keep her close. And another way is through the emotional pressure, the snide remarks, it's been 2 weeks, I'm keeping track, I have a spreadsheet. And that is suffocating. That is pressure. There's no room for her to want anything at all. So what you actually have to do is loosen your grip, stand back, take responsibility for your own happiness, which means doing things that you enjoy and having hobbies. It's really as simple as this. And then giving her space to think, do I actually want a sexless marriage? Is this really what I want? And I've never had a woman who said yes. They all say no. I also mourn that we don't have sex very often, or I also don't like it, that I don't enjoy it very much.
Okay. Wow. So once again, it's the opposite effect. So do that, and then people kind of come around. They come back around. They feel safe, and they come back around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how can one get in touch with you? How do you kind of get into your world then?
But really the best way is to get some value, and I have a quiz called the 4 Desire Fixes. And if you take this quiz, it's really short. It'll give you the desire fix that is most suited to where you are right now. And you'll get an email with a video and some action steps, and you can take action right away. And you can go do that quiz by going to jannadentonhowes.com/quiz.
Okay, and how many questions?
That's a really great question. I think there's about 20.
Okay.
It's really quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes and no,
just
true and false.
Just a multiple choice.
Oh, multiple choice. Okay. All right. Yeah. Great. And of course, your website or contact number, is that, can you give that?
Yeah, you can go to, if you take that quiz, then you'll be put on my email list. And I do videos every single week, so you'll get even more free tips and strategies and get to see my face. I do them on Facebook Live, but I also email them out and put them on my blog. So if you go to jannadentonhowes.com, you can find my blog. And I launch the Wanting It More program 3 times a year. And I am, at the time of this recording, which I know will be a little bit earlier than when it's put out, but I am just wrapping up a launch. The cart closes on Wednesday, but I will be doing a spring round and a fall. What are we doing here? A spring and a summer round as well.
Okay. Well, great. Well, Janna, thank you so much for coming on the Lovers Lounge.
Thank you.
This has been awesome. I really appreciate you coming and sharing with us. And everybody, I hope that you have enjoyed listening to this episode of the Lovers Lounge, where we talk to experts and other guests about topics that are related to love, relationships, and sex. I am your host, Tina Love. And until next time, I wish you peace and, of course, love. Bye-bye.